Now the action has started in Black Box, and therefore we are going to take you live there. The theme is workshop on VR filmmaking. VR is virtual reality. We are on the verge of creating the first VR cinematic filmmakers, and here you'll have Chaitanya Chinchlikar as one of the panelists, Aditya Doshi and Zanik.
Thank you, sir. Now, without wasting any time, I hand over the stage to Mr. Chaitanya Chinchlikar.
Hi. Okay. I don't want to block this. क्या area कहाँ पे मैं चल सकता हूँ कितना? I can move, no? Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everybody's up after lunch and not, I don't bore you to sleep. So we're, like she said, I'm from the Whistling Woods International Film and Creative Arts Institute. I'm also the head of the Whistling Woods Geo VR Lab. It's something that we started a year and a half ago to develop academic content and curriculum and teaching methodologies for cinematic VR, fiction narrative storytelling in 360 VR. So I'm kind of here to talk to you about cinematic VR and a little bit about what we've been doing in the lab and where I see VR going. So before I start, couple of questions. How many of you have seen any VR content? Okay, that's pretty good. You are more than the India average. So approximately 0.3% of India has seen any VR content. Right? Don't feel too worried about that, because only 3% of India has ever seen a feature film on the big screen. So it's not that far off, right? So before I get into VR, I want to talk to you a little bit, just 2 slides about the Indian media and entertainment industry and where VR will sit inside it, right? So let's just take one slide on the Indian M&A industry. So we're what you would call low value, high volume. So lots and lots of people consuming lots and lots of content, but the per unit content consumption cost is very, very, very low. It's how the industry is. We're the Parle G of the world, right? We're not the Oreo. So broadly, the industry comprises of these segments. And the real growth of the industry is coming from online gaming and digital media. And that's exactly where VR sits. Both in gaming as well as content, digital content. Right? So these are the 4 viewing platforms that we have as of now. So I've just classified them on a value volume scale to give you some sense of where they are placed, how much does it cost to consume, say, one piece of media of these platforms, and how many people are consuming it. So if you look at cinema, theatrical, very, very few people consume it, and it costs quite a lot. It's the most expensive per unit media consumption platform that we have. Then you have premium OTT, which is your Netflix and Amazon of the world. Then you've got freemium OTT, where there's some free content and some premium content. That's your Hotstar, Sony Live, Z5, etc., etc., etc. We have 30 or so platforms of those. You've got free OTT, which is your YouTube, Instagram video, TikTok. Ridiculous number of TikTok people in India. It's very unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, those exist. And this is your cable and satellite / direct to home. So this is where it is. Now we're gonna put VR into this as we go ahead, so you'll get a good sense of where VR sits. I just want to put these numbers in for you to give you a good sense of how large a market we are. So your primarily your kind of main big chunks of audience that exist are in what you call bundled digital, which is they consume pay TV and only telco bundled content. So whatever the telecom company gives you free along with the thing is what people watch. So that's about 200 million. And mass consumers who are essentially who have cable TV, but occasionally may consume some OTT content. So they see a good show and then they subscribe for a month to say Alt or Z5 or Amazon or Hotstar or something like that. They're not regular subscribers. That's 427 million. 427 million is the combined digital viewer base of the US and Brazil put together. And that's just our only mass consumers. So the potential that exists here is huge. And that's exactly where VR sits. Right? Now, before we get to VR, we have to understand one factor, which is called immersion. So before we get to immersion, let me ask you one question. I'm going to make this very interactive. This is a very interactive session. I'm not a typical professor, even though I may look like one. How many senses do we have? Everybody was taught this in school, hopefully. Five. Any other answers? Six. Anything else? Okay. So yeah, here's where the problems with our education system come to fore. Because we actually don't have 5 or 6 senses. In reality, we have 27 senses. And our school textbooks have never really bothered to update themselves. So, the obvious answer is 5. So sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. But in reality, there are 27. Right? And then essentially senses are based into, broken into 2 areas. One is perception-based senses and second is organ-based senses. So perception-based senses is just a fancy way of saying that, you know, our biology hasn't progressed far enough to figure out, you know, which organ is perceiving that sense. But basically, that's what it is. So there are 4 perception-based senses right now we have, which is one is time. You can, you know, the humans can sense time, the passage of time. We may not know how much time, but we know that time has passed. Agency, control. So a good example of this is people who have motion sickness. So if they're driving the car, they don't have a problem, but if they're sitting in the car being driven by someone else, they're suddenly throwing up all over the place. Right? The bumps are the same, everything is the same, nothing has changed on the road. So what has changed? What has changed is the sense of agency, of control. Familiarity, what we all call deja vu. We've all experienced this at some point of time. And we sense gravity. We don't know how we sense gravity because we're not really magnetic, but we're not made out of metal, even though there's a little bit of iron in all our cells. But how do we sense gravity? So these are perception-based senses, and then there's a bunch of organ-based senses. This is available on SlideShare on my LinkedIn, so you can go check it out. I'm not going to get into each one of them. But the reason why I'm talking about senses is because the next sense is immersion. So it has not yet been formally documented globally as a sense, but depending on which side of the Atlantic you are, one say it is a sense, one say it isn't a sense. But eventually, over the next 2 or 3 years, it will settle down as one of the senses that we have. Now, immersion is further broken down into 2 types of immersion. So there is technical immersion, physical or technical immersion, and cognitive immersion. So one is physically, you're immersed in something like you are physically, technically immersed in this room, in this atmosphere. Cognitive immersion is what all of us as filmmakers and film goers have been experiencing. There's 2 kinds of cognitive immersion where your mind is immersed, right? One is a spatial immersion where you feel like you are part of the visual that you're watching. So, or if somebody tells you a story in a really compelling way and you feel like you're part of that space, that's a spatial immersion. Then there's temporal immersion, where somebody's, you're watching a film or you're watching a piece of content and you feel like you're part of the timeline. You feel like you're, living the character's journey, or you're watching that character live his or her journey. That's temporal immersion. There's spatio-temporal immersion where you get both. And the fourth one, which is the most important one, which our industry relies on, is emotional immersion. Right? When a mother cries on screen because her baby is being separated from her, you cry. That's emotional immersion. You're emotionally immersed in the content, so that mirror neuron syndrome and that empathy center of your brain kicks in. Right? Now, these are the areas that are hyperactivated when you get into VR content. Your sense of immersion is hyperactivated. I have seen people who are standing on firm ground, but if I put them in a VR headset and the scene has the camera in a helicopter, I have seen people throw up. I have seen people with vertigo fall down. Right? I have seen people who even if the camera kind of does where your horizon changes, if the camera tilts like this and they're in VR, physically the person will go like this. It's because the sense of immersion is overpowering the body's natural sense of balance. So this is something that you need to understand first as filmmakers, content creators, content experiences, and then you can start to tackle it. The biggest problems that have happened in VR so far is because people haven't tackled immersion well. Right? So once we identify that this is a very, very, very strong force that the content creator now has at his or her disposal, which honestly none of the other filmmakers in the past have, because they have always been in a framed environment where the viewer is outside the content. I mean, I'll explain to you in a sports way. All this while, you've been playing table tennis. Now you're playing tennis. Right? So all this while, you've been outside the content, watching the content. Now you are inside the content. And as filmmakers, content creators, once you understand that, then you understand how to treat the narrative or the cinematic experience. So now let's get to VR. Oh, sorry, first. And this is really more about as tastes and as technology changes, people are no longer happy with just content. Right? So we were just happy to somehow manage to watch a film. But no, this generation, my kids, they're not happy with just content. They want the experience. Right? They want content to be accessible, affordable, authentic, cool, customized, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, they can want it. But what is happening is that the market is responding. Industry is responding. And now you have a bunch of enabling technologies that have come together in order to give the user experience that the people want, which is above just content. So AI, augmented reality, blockchain, etc., etc. If you go down this list, 99% of India's technology startups outside of fintech and food tech are in this list. 99%. Right? So it's a very, very, very strong industry that's looking at giving these kids, giving this Generation Z, millennials, whatever you want to call them, what they want, which is stuff beyond content. They want to experience things. Okay, first things first, and you will hear this a lot as any platform tries to come together, is you'll hear a lot of jargon. Don't get lost in it, right? It's very, very, very simple. What is augmented reality? What is virtual reality? And what is mixed reality? Now, there are some people who want to put all this together and call it extended reality. Let them, doesn't matter. So, virtual reality is where the real world is shut out. And you are just seeing a digital recreation that has been shot or created on a computer. Augmented reality is where you're seeing the real world and then there's digital content on top of that, right? And mixed reality is where the digital content actually interacts with the real world. So you're able to hide things behind this chair or that kind of stuff. So this gives you a good understanding. So this is basically what you need to know. Don't otherwise get lost in the jargon, right? And this is another area that's quite important for everybody to know, which is degrees of freedom. I'm assuming everybody's got some film understanding, background, love, keen to be filmmakers here, right? So everybody understands what degrees of freedom are? 3 DOF, 6 DOF. Yes, no. Wake up. Yes, no. Anybody saying no? I'm happy to explain. So a camera can move in 6 ways. It can move front, back, left, right, up, down. That's the first 3 degrees of freedom of movement the camera has. Then the camera can pan, the camera can tilt, and the camera can roll. Those are the next 3 degrees of freedom. Okay? So there's 3 DOF content, 3 degrees of freedom content, and there's 6 DOF content, 6 degrees of freedom content. So this gives you a good sense of the 6 degrees of freedom. So you have to be careful because in this case the person is larger, the content is larger than the person, you have to be careful on how you treat the degrees of freedom. Right? You don't suddenly want the kind of the entire world that you're making the person watch in VR go sideways. People will freak out. Can you imagine if suddenly you're watching me and suddenly I was sideways? Right? Your internal brain wouldn't be able to deal with it. And that's what happens. So this is another area that people need to be very, very careful about. Now, how do you approach cinematic VR? Now, any new platform, any new area, any new industry you approach it on basically 3 aspects. You approach it on the technology, you approach it from the business side, and then you approach it from the craft or the art or the content, right? All industries are made up of these 3. There's the business, there's the tech, and there's the art, and there's the craft. Problem solving exists in VR right now because it's a new and emerging medium. But eventually the problem solving will reduce and reduce and reduce. Right? So let's look at the tech. So the Gartner is a company that creates something called a Gartner hype cycle. Now this is essentially for emerging technologies. As they enter the market, they go through a particular cycle. And this Gartner hype cycle has been on for about 40 years now, and they've generally proven to be pretty right. So you have 5 phases that any emerging technology goes through. So there's the innovation trigger, there's the peak of inflated expectations, where everybody thinks that it's going to solve all the world's problems, this new technology. There's the trough of disillusionment, when people realize that, it's not going to solve all the world's problems. Then there's the slope of enlightenment, when they get back to reality, and it kind of heads onto the plateau of productivity, and then something heads off the hype cycle. When something heads off the hype cycle, it is no longer emerging, and it's no longer hype. It's settled technology. So this was the Gartner hype cycle into 2017, and VR had come out of the worst area. Right? So most technologies die here that don't have legs. They end up kind of dying here. So 3D died here, for example. It never came out of the trough of disillusionment. Right? So this is 2017, this is 2018. So as you can see, VR is no longer on the Gartner hype cycle. So it means 2 things. A, it is not emerging technology anymore, but it has emerged, and it's not hype. So this is a strong indication that VR is here. It's here to stay. Now, a good example, a good, how should I say, symptom or a good outcome of a settled technology, of an emerged technology, is that you have a stabilized technology pipeline. Right? Where your acquisition, post-production, distribution, technology workflows and pipelines are kind of stable. Thoda improvement hota rahega, little bit it'll keep improving, but it's generally stable. So this is what it is. You can acquire 360 content with cameras which are 2 lenses to 16 lenses. You have in-camera stabilization, you have in-camera stitching. Then you've got, in production, post-production, you have both local stitching as well as cloud stitching. You have a whole edit and effects pipeline that's built out, and then you can finish and export to whichever format you want. Very similar to how you would do digital content. You have a distribution mechanism, so either you can download a video on a VR device and then play it back, or you can stream. So both kinds of distribution have settled down now. And then there's a bunch of head-mounted displays or viewing devices. So you've got mobile and headset, you've got what's called a standalone, you've got tethered to server, you've got location-based experiences, then you have seated VR experiences, where you sit in a chair and the chair moves and you're wearing a VR thing, and it's kind of pretty cool, actually. So this gives you a good sense that the tech is settled. So we're not grappling with technology anymore like we were about a couple of years ago. So when we started, when the Whistling with Geo VR lab started, even stitching was a pain. Now really stitching is not a pain. Most of the camera manufacturers have figured out how to stitch, and it's no longer an issue. Now you look at the business, and this is something that everybody will agree, if it doesn't work financially, it doesn't work. No matter how creative and no matter how much great content gets created in it, it needs to work as a business because somebody needs to pay for all this stuff. So I just ignore the numbers. They're all nice, everything is going up and is all fine and all good, and there's enough research out there on VR numbers. But the key slide that I actually rely on that makes me happy is this one. Is where Greenlight did a survey with quite a few people on, so they surveyed people, everybody, and then they also surveyed people who were current VR content consumers. And then they asked them the question, do you want to consume movies and videos in VR? So the entire world, everybody, so including VR consumers and non-VR consumers, about 75% of the people said yes, they want to. But of the VR consumers, 87% said that they want to do it. So what does this mean? It means that VR is not a letdown. Right? It's not like people get into it and they're like, this doesn't make sense, or I'm not enjoying it. It doesn't mean that. It means that it's actually working. Right? People do enjoy it. The experiential experience is good. They want to consume content. In the case of live events, the difference is about the same. So about 69% of the whole populace wants to consume live events in VR, but people who've done it already, it's 81%. And in the case of live sports, the difference is almost 20%. People who have consumed live sports in VR understand the value, understand the importance, understand how great an experience it is, rather than just watching it on TV, and they want to do it. Almost 20% more than what everybody else thinks it is. So until you've experienced it, it's very difficult to actually explain to somebody what the experience is, primarily because it's very difficult for human beings, for us to understand what immersion is and what value it adds to the experience. I mean, words haven't been invented yet to describe that feeling. Now, like you have in OTT, like you have in cinema, there are multiple business models in VR, which are directly linked to the kind of the way that you consume VR content. So the bottom one is the mobile plus headset. So it's very simple. You take a cell phone, put it into a VR headset, put it in over your head, and you can consume VR content. Today in India, for $110, you can be a VR consumer. A 7,000-8,000 rupee decent new smartphone is VR ready. You get a headset for about 300 bucks, 300 rupees, you're set. There is ample amount of VR content available online for free that you can consume. You can comfortably consume 10 to 15 minutes of fresh VR content every day just using your mobile and headset. So that's the bottom of the pyramid. Next you come to wireless. So there are standalone VR devices, which is essentially, it's a VR wearable device which is connected to the internet through 4G or through Wi-Fi. And it doesn't really need a physical connection to a computer. So it's called a standalone. Then you've got your tethered to the server. So it's a rather large VR headset with wires going to a computer. Then you have the tethered and seated experience and the LBE, location-based entertainment. How many of you have ever experienced any location-based experience in VR? Yeah, there are hardly any in India. Globally, there are a few, but in India, there aren't any yet. And this is how these 5 things sit on the VR content business models scale, right? So your mobile and headset is really, really cheap, and that's where the most of the volume is going to come. Then you've got your wireless connected HMD standalones, and then this is where your high-end content is going to come. So think of this as head-mounted display. Right? It's like well, right now it's a shoebox you wear on your head, but eventually it'll get better. Yeah. So think of this as YouTube content consumption. Think of this as Netflix. And then this is home theater. And then this is going out to a amusement park or something like that for a immersive location-based VR experience. So remember the platforms that we spoke about earlier, the 4 content platforms. So this is where immersion. So we did theatrical, premium, all these earlier. This is where immersive content is right now. So in volume, it's even lower than theatrical, but it costs about the same. Now, as you go ahead, this cost will start to come down. And as the cost starts to come down, the number of people consuming it will go up. And this is where it's likely to end in about 5 years from now for India, right? So it'll cost you marginally more than premium OTT, and hence you'll have lots of content consumption. Now let's come to the most important part, which is the content. All this is fine. Technology sab theek hai, business, dhanda vanda sab barabar jordar. But if there is no content being created, nobody's creating content, what the hell are going to people watch? They'll watch, just put that shoebox on their head and watch what? Right? So now this is really where you get into serious understanding of content of VR. So you have to look at the platform and how the content is informed by the nature of viewing of the platform. So cinema is captive community viewing. TV is non-captive family viewing in India. Digital is non-captive individual viewing, and VR is captive individual viewing. And that defines the kind of content being created for these platforms. So cinema is audio-visual narrative spectacle. TV gives you time for story and character development, right? Then you've got, because it's appointment viewing, you have time. You can build out a story, you can build out characters over a long period of time. Digital, because it's individual viewing, there is almost zero inhibition. You can watch what you want without being judged. Otherwise, whether it's cinema or whether it's television, you are judged by what you watch, by your friends, by your family. In the case of OTT digital, you can watch what you want. So that ensures that the content that's created is edgy. It pushes the envelope, because you will find an audience for anything, right? I mean, there was big hue and cry when Alt Balaji put out Gandhi Bath and Gandhi Bath 1 and 2. And then you looked at the numbers and you're like, wow, 46% of Gandhi Bath viewers is rural India. 39% of Gandhi Bath viewers are women. Right? So who's complaining? Why are you complaining? So it's very, 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 very strong. And that's the key thing that's also going to translate into VR. Because it's individual viewing, because nobody else knows what you're watching inside that headset, you're going to have a wide variety of content that will be created. So the captiveness of the individual viewing helps with adding more verticals to the kind of content that will be created. So, I mean, forget about the platform viewing details, duration structure. This is more technical in nature. This is more narrative in nature. So film is primarily standalone, marginally serial. So there are few serialized films. There are quite a few, but not as many as standalone. Standalone is like 99% of film content. But television is primarily serial, marginally standalone. Digital is about 50-50. And VR and AR is likely to be similar to digital. So there'll be serialized content as well as standalone content. in equal measure. This is the key. So USP, larger than life audiovisual narrative spectacle. TV is appointment viewing. Digital OTT is high concept, less formulaic. Writing focused, pace is critical. VR is essentially immersive and interactive, is what we know right now. We are still trying to come up with what's the USP for VR content going to be other than immersive and interactive. And that's the journey that, well, us and my kids and our students and all the other filmmakers out there will take over the next 5 years. There will be a USP that will evolve over the years, right? Now, this is a very interesting curve. Now, if you see the curve as such is very similar to the Gartner hype cycle. But this is actually not a technology curve. This is a psychology curve. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So it tracks knowledge, skills, and confidence on 2 axes. So when you have no knowledge, you have no confidence. Then you gain a little bit of knowledge, and suddenly your confidence shoots through the roof. And now you're standing on top of Mount Stupid. Right? And then you gain a little more knowledge, and then you realize, shit, I know nothing. Right? And then you crash into the valley of despair, and you're like, I don't know anything, I don't know what I'm doing, what is this, let me go and become an engineer, etc., etc., etc. Things start to come into your mind. Valley of despair, then wisdom starts to set in, and then you get onto the slope of enlightenment, at some stage you will become a guru. Now, the interesting bit is, even at the peak of being guru, you're still not as confident as you were when you were standing on top of Mount Stupid. So that's something for everybody to remember. So this is where VR is right now. It has gone through this whole journey. It has come out of the valley of despair, is now on the slope of enlightenment. So now people are not expecting VR to solve all the world's problems. They're approaching it very pragmatically. They're approaching it like they would approach content creation. And almost every single type of content or platform has gone through this journey. Now this is another way to look at VR content. Now, content has 3 aspects to it. There is emotion. So how much of an emotional experience is it? Do I have, as a viewer, do I have control over the content that I'm consuming? And what is the consumption speed of the content? Can I tweak the consumption speed? Right? Now, if you look at film, normal feature film, the viewer has no agency, has no control. Somebody's written it, bunch of people have directed it, some other people have acted in it. You have no control over any of that. You're just sitting and watching, but it's an emotional experience, and you can control the speed of consumption. Right? You're watching something on a laptop, it's boring, you want to stop, just pause it, go, come back, do something else. So you do have control over this. But if it is a game, you do have full control over content, because the content decides what you do, right? And you decide what the content does. Similarly, you can control the speed of consumption, but it's a limited emotional experience. I'm not saying it's not an emotional experience. It's very limited emotional experience in gaming, because you don't have that much of cognitive immersion in a game. You're still looking at it as always as a third person. And the third one is live content. If you're watching something live, right? You cannot change the speed of content consumption. You can't make things go faster if they're happening live, right? You can't make it go slower either. But it is an emotional experience, and you do have full control. So that's live. Now, this is essentially a merger of 3 aspects. A combination of these will decide what kind of VR content is being created. So if you give a lot of control to the viewer to make multiple choice decisions and look here and look there, and something gets triggered and whatever, multiple levels, it'll become more game-like. If you take away a lot of control from the viewer, it's more film-like. If you allow the viewer to control speed, right, it's again a little more game-like. If it's live, then it's kind of different. So you have to decide how much of these 3 you want to, each of these circles, you want to push in or pull out to determine what kind of VR content gets created, right? Don't get too bogged down by this. It took me also a while to kind of wrap my head around it. But this is analysis that people have done over the years, all over the world. So in fact, this one was contributed by one of our global advisory board. It took me about a good week to understand it myself. So don't worry. This is more interesting. This is better for production complexity. So as a producer, you want to now, say you've got a good sense of cinematic VR content, now you want to go and create content, right? You want to go and pitch to someone, you want to decide for yourself, ये कितना महंगा है, कितना difficult है, कैसे करूँ? So you have to decide what your reality index is, what your interaction index is, and what your movement index is. So if you're going to make it rendered or simulated, so it means if you're going to make it CG in a computer on Maya, in Unity or something like that, versus just shoot it. So shooting it easier, I put a VR camera, a 360 camera here, I shoot the room, within 5 minutes I've got the room captured. All I have to do is hide myself and other people who I don't want to be part of the scene. It's not that difficult to do, right? But if I have to create this room in a computer, it'll take like a month. If I have to create all of you lifelike, if I have to create everything in a computer, it'll take a month, right? So it's harder to do it in rendered simulated and it's easier to do in actual. Is the viewer going to be an active observer or a passive observer? So does the content move ahead, change based on what the viewer does, where the viewer looks, what the viewer does, to walk around in the VR world? Then you're essentially creating what's called 6 degrees of freedom, volumetrically captured VR, which is far more expensive, far more intensive, far more computing heavy, everything to do, than if it's just single point, fixed point, no movement viewing, right? Where the camera may move, but the individual can't move within the scene. So you have to decide, you pick these three and then build out your index, and that will give you whether this is high production complexity or low production complexity. So I would recommend anybody who wants to start, please start with low, right? Get your feet wet a little bit, make all the mistakes you want, and then move on to more complex stuff. It has taken, it's not that easy. Yeah, it's hard. So the great part is it's very, very intuitive. It is very, very natural, because when you are in a headset, when you shoot short content, you figure out why you would turn around and look at something and use that as a reference to whether the audience would, right? So you have yourself as the first subject, as the first example and subject of your own content, because you have not seen the content while it's being shot. You cannot see the content while it's being shot. So that gives you a good, like a edge up in evaluation. Problem solving. Now this is, well, not your thing to do. This is my problem, right? But I'm just telling you about it since we are talking about cinematic VR. So in about a couple of years, this list will not exist, hopefully. So Felix and Paul, don't take a photo of this, please. Yeah? Felix and Paul are one of the world's best VR content creators today. If you've seen any of their content on Oculus Studios, it's just heavenly. It's mind-blowing. I run out of adjectives, right? So this is their CTO's internal list of running problems in VR to fix, which I kind of managed to get a hold on. But this is quite complex, so I have narrowed it down. Yeah, now you can shoot this. I have narrowed it down to these areas. So one is standards, because there are no technical standards right now in VR. There is security that I was talking about, don't move the camera around too much, don't kind of make people throw up, etc., etc. There is acquisition and data management, because there's shitloads of data, lots of data, and acquiring it is difficult. There's the file formats, workflow, and the software pipeline, computing requirements, awareness, and educating content creators. Now, thankfully, only these two are our problem. when I say our, I mean content creators in general. The tech companies will fix all this. For standards, you have standards bodies. And health departments will take care of standards and security, acquisition, data management between the cameras and the hard disks and the computing people of the world. You pitch Obsidian versus an HP and let them fight. Right? Put Intel in the middle as referee. Right? वो उनका problem है. So तो आग लगा के fight छोड़ दो तुम. They will solve it. It'll take 6 months or so, but they will solve the problem. Similarly, with file formats, workflow and distribution, MPEG and other people will take care of the. Somebody will come in and create a file format that is needed. Honestly, it's not our worry, because the industry is stable now. So there is effort going into fixing things. Software pipeline, again, it will continue to develop. It's hyper dynamic. There will be somebody who will come up with a new software, and there will be somebody who will come up with a better software, and somebody will come up with something else, and soon you'll be able to edit VR films on your phone, like you can do normal content now. Right? So not a problem. Our problem is these two: educating content creators and building awareness. Because if you don't do these, all this that people do goes to waste, because there are no content creators. So this is what we've been doing now for the last year and a bit. We've done a bunch of series and workshops on campus. We've made a lot of VR content, and through that we have reverse engineered a curriculum that we will start to teach. And I just want to share some learnings, some initial learnings that we've developed from that. Yeah. Some key learnings that we've developed, I want to share those with you, and then eventually, it's difficult for me to talk about the entire curriculum now in 3 hours, because it takes 5 weeks. But anyway, so there is no such person as a VR expert. Anybody who comes to you, friends, family, people you know, some filmmaker says, I am VR expert, does not exist. Right? It's like a unicorn. It's a joke. There are only 5 rules right now in VR. So as film schools, as us, as filmmakers, we don't like rules. But these are 5 rules that you have to follow. And I will insist that you follow them. First, don't bore people. Right? Just because you can put a headset in them and you have them, don't bore them. Don't put them in the middle of a sea with sharks around and that's it. Or don't put them on a roller coaster, or don't send them in a hot air balloon up into space, because it's boring. Story batao. Right? Experience. Second, don't confuse people. VR is not a treasure hunt. Just because you have a frameless environment, don't put where the first shot is here, and the second shot is there, and the third shot is there, and the fourth shot is there, and people are just doing this. Don't do that. Right? Third, and most important, don't give people whiplash. Right? Keep contextually the content between 160 degrees to 210 degrees, which is what your peripheral vision is. As VR content starts to get longer and better, people will watch it sitting down. They will not be able to turn beyond this. So don't make them keep turning around all the goal. Don't, just because you can. If you have to make them turn around, make sure there's a damn good reason that they will turn around. Make it worth their while, right? Obviously, don't make people vomit, right? Even when you make normal films, you should make people vomit, but you should definitely not make people vomit in VR, because they will vomit on you. And back up your data. There is crazy amounts of VR data, and there is nothing you can do about it if it goes. Right? There is about 6 times as much. So if you're shooting 1 minute in 4K, and if you're shooting 1 minute in VR, there's about 6 to 8 times the amount of data that gets generated. Right? So it's just too heavy and too big, and 2 TB hard disks are a joke. They're pointless. I think we got like 60 TB hard disks now floating around office. So back up your data, right? So these are this is the fun part. Now, yeah, there is some serious stuff as well. Now, when you look at a VR film, stop looking at it as a film, as in a standard, typical, traditional narrative. Look at it as an experience of which the story is one part, the visuals are one part, the sound is one part, the interactivity is one part, right? You may want the proceedings to pause for a while and give people some chance to look around and then move ahead. And then you want them to make a couple of choices. You want them to look in a particular direction before the scene cuts to the next one. Otherwise, they lose the point of the cut, etc., etc. So keep all these things in mind, that it's an experience, right? It's not a film. Stop looking at it as a typical film standard where it's the story, that the thread that holds it all together. In the case of VR, it's not that. There are multiple threads that hold it together. Sound is extremely strong in VR because you have spatial audio, right? You use it as a way to direct attention. Oh, cinematic grammar needs to be completely rewritten for frameless content, right? Because there is no frame. So this that traditionally people used to do is pointless. What is this? Right? You have to make the viewer do that in their head. And that's the craft, that's the art. How are you going to make the viewer look in the way that you want, look at what you want, without feeling like he or she is being forced or directed to look there? Because if you direct attention too much, then there is another syndrome that sets in called FOMO, fear of missing out, right? And you don't want too much FOMO because then that starts to affect them as well. So this gives you a good understanding of, you know, some of the areas. The viewer's eye are your viewfinder and your frame, right? So you have to make them look where you want to. Solving people's FOMO is the big challenge, like I said. And yeah, also what I said earlier, think of why and how you would look at something and then replicate that in your film. So if you are going to do a murder scene, or if you're going to do a thriller, or if you're going to do something, try and make it as natural and intuitive as possible. Remember, you have a complete 360 world frameless environment. You can put content right on the floor if you want to. In feature films, you can't. In digital, you can't, because it's away from the consumer. Here, its consumer is inside the content, right? So use that to your benefit. Use that to your experience, to create the experience. Every VR shot is a VFX shot. So if you have a good friend who's strong in VFX, like, marry him or her now, because they're worth their weight in gold for any VR shoots. Every VR shot is a VFX shot. And you have to treat it with that much importance, with that much patience, with that much preparation, and that much planning, right?
What is FOMO?
Fear of missing out. Sorry, sir, generation gap. वो बच्चों में बोलते हैं, it's teen slang. It's called fear of missing out, FOMO. So your grandchildren probably, my children, your grandchildren. So what next, right? We've got all these learnings. There's much more learning. So Yang and Aditya will talk to you about writing for VR, direction for VR, and producing for VR. But as an overview, I don't want to get too much into that. What next? Where is this going to go? So, forget about this. Yes. So you will start to see widespread fiction narrative content being created in VR over the next few years. First generation of cinematic VR content creators to emerge in India, hopefully from next year or the year after that, which is, you know, all the kids we're training on campus. Increased festival inclusion, dedicated VR film festivals. So you already have them in Berlin, in Venice, in Canada, all over the place. You know, who knows, maybe a couple of years down the line, IFFI will have a VR section. Happy to help. The tech pipeline will get better. So you'll have better quality film grade sensors. You'll have cinematic lenses. You'll have 6 degrees of freedom volumetric capture, point cloud capture, don't get lost in the, forget it. It's just fancy words. Tech pipeline will get better. Stabilization, so the VR workflow will get more and more stable. Head-mounted displays will get better. Right now, it's just this big bulky shoebox. It will get more sleeker. It will get better. We've seen it now just in the last 18 months. So much change is coming. Native spatial audio. So again, spatial audio is essentially directional audio, where you actually hear audio from like everywhere. Just like you would hear in Dolby Digital Surround or Atmos, where you hear from everywhere. It's that spatial audio. So spatial audio will come in all headsets and mobiles as a matter of course, hopefully. And then adequate computing and graphic computing power will kick in. 5G will help quality streaming, high quality streaming in VR. But again, I don't know how far away 5G is going to be. It's running into all kinds of problems right now. Thank you. Not bad, 5 minutes. So I can take 5 minutes of questions. Any questions? I can't have, yeah.
That's a simple question.
Sure.
Hindi?
कोई भी भाषा चलेगी.
Hello. Hello sir, my name is Shubham Pandey. एक्चुअली हम सब ने VR बॉक्स की जो कंटेंट हैं वो थोड़े बहुत या तो देखे हैं ऐसे कि जो सस्ते वाले आते हैं, जैसे कि आपने बताया 300 रुपये वाले चालू हो जाते हैं, और बहुत अच्छा देखा है अगर अपने से ऑर्डर करके तो MI वाला 1500 रुपये का ऑर्डर किया. इसके अलावा कभी पे किया है तो मॉल वगैरह में जा कर के 250 रुपये 1.5 मिनट का दे करके आए हैं.
करेक्ट.
और उसमें देखा ये है कि जो 300 रुपये वाला मंगाया, हमें लगा कि यार इसमें क्वालिटी अच्छी क्यों नहीं दिख रही है, जबकि हम अपने YouTube में जा करके, क्योंकि अब उसके अलावा कहीं और से कंटेंट परचेस करना वो भी मुझे 2,500 से 3,000 रुपये शायद वीडियो के लग जाएंगे. तो उसमें हमने क्वालिटी को बहुत ज़्यादा इंक्रीज़ भी किया, 2K में देख रहे हैं, उसके बावजूद जो है हमें पिक्सल्स बहुत ज़्यादा ख़राब नज़र आ रहे हैं. ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे कि हम रियल में कोई 3GP की वीडियो देख रहे हो. फिर हमने सोचा कि यार थोड़ा महंगा वाला मंगाते हैं, MI वाला देखा हमने देखा कि कंटेंट जो है अभी भी वही 3GP से थोड़ा बहुत नरिश हो गया, बस इतना ही हुआ. HTC वाइब जो कि अभी आपका रिटर्न भी था, HTC वाइब में मैंने देखा 10 में वो 1,73,000 का दिखेगा नॉर्मली 80 से 90,000 रुपए में, और जबकि उसके लिए 16 GB का कम से कम रैम, 8 GB की ग्राफिक्स कार्ड और इस तरह की चीज़ें ज़रूरी होती हैं उसके लिए. इतना सब कुछ इतना बेहतरीन तरीके से जमा होने के बावजूद, इतना महंगा होने के बावजूद, अभी भी वो ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा क्या लग रहा था जैसे मैं 480 क्वालिटी में देख रहा हूँ. वो क्वालिटी कब बढ़ने वाली है, मतलब
गुड क्वेश्चन. सो मैं एक्चुअली स्लाइड स्किप किया, आई स्किप द स्लाइड, बट मैं नहीं करता तो आपका जवाब अपने आप आ जाता. तो एक तो 2 things. One is this is the normal graph of any emerging technology. आपको याद है मोबाइल पे कंटेंट देखते थे 5 साल पहले, कितना गंदा भद्दा सब कुछ, लाइक नथिंग, इट वाज टेरेबल.
4G के पहले सब खराब था.
हाँ, राइट. 2G पे कंटेंट देखा है, राइट. ऑब्वियसली वो बफरिंग तो, आई मीन इट वुड बफर मोर देन इट वुड प्ले. So a 2-minute video would take 6 minutes to play, because 4 minutes it would be buffering, right? So that's where we are in VR right now. So try and imagine where we were और अब कहाँ आ गए, right? Where आप comfortably phone पे 2-3 घंटे आराम से देख सकते हैं, ना बैटरी मरती है, ना streaming में problem होता है, वगैरह वगैरह वगैरह. So VR will, so hold on, VR will get there. So that's on the hardware and the distribution piece. So we've carried with you. So at the end